Alright YouTube, here we are back for day 2, part 2 of the hydrostatic pressure test for this Craftsman air compressor. Things I've done since the last time I posted the part 1 video. Covered up the motor with 3 layers of plastic, just because I didn't feel like taking the motor off. The plug for the main hole came, the one that I'd ordered that didn't require me to put in a drain plug on it came via Amazon, so I'm going to use that instead of the one that required me to put in the drain valve. I filled the tank with water, and to do that I used a 5-gallon bucket and a funnel. I went through the main plug and I filled it up as much as I could, and then to top it off, because if you can kind of notice, you want the tank as full as possible with water, and both of these ports are actually lower than the top of the tank. So I filled it up as much as possible. I put the plug in, and then I took a ladder, 4-foot step stool that I have, 4-foot ladder, and I put a water jug on top of it, and use just the old gas siphon trick with a small tube inserted down through this valve, or this port, to fill up the tank completely. And how I did that was I started the siphon, stuck it in there, and I tipped the tank forward. Even with 25 gallons of water in there, 25 gallons of water in there, there's still some air left at the top. And tipping the tank forward, if you have a large tank, or if you're a smaller person, you might want a friend to assist you with this. I tipped the tank forward so that this was level with the ground. This is going in at a 90-degree angle. So if you get this basically the port level with the ground, this perpendicular with the ground, you're putting this port at the highest point, which means all the air can come out. Stuck the siphon down in there, and I filled it up as much as possible. There's actually water right at the top of the port, which is what you want to see, which really means that since the port itself, the top of this is higher than the top of the tank, I know that there is absolutely no air in this tank, and that's what you want. No air in the tank means that as I pump water in, it will pressurize faster. If there's air in here, it's going to take a little bit of extra pumping to basically pressurize the air up enough to put the pressure into the tank that we want. The little bit of air that's in here is not any kind of an explosive concern. If you can't get it all out, that's fine. But try to, figure out a way based on your tank configuration to get as much air out as possible. So I think we're ready to start the hydrostatic test. Let me kind of bring you over to the table here, and I'll show you some of the things that I've done to prepare for it. All right, so on the table here, you'll see what is really effectively a cut-up flip-flop. I'm a big Reef flip-flop fan and wear flip-flops most of the year. Had some old ones kind of hanging around, and I took one that my friend's dog chewed on, and I used it to basically put the grease gun up against, make a circle, and then go a little bit, maybe about 1/8 of an inch outside of the circle with a utility knife and cut the flip-flop up. I have 3 of those plugged down in the grease gun. I also put a good amount of sealant, Teflon tape, on the grease gun itself at the top, because in some of the testing that I've done, I noticed that a lot of the leaks were coming out of the top. The grease gun has a rubber seal on top, but it's really made for a grease tube to fit on. So I put the Teflon tape on. I put maybe three passes of Teflon tape on earlier when I tested it out. Didn't seem to be enough, so I went with about 5 for the test here. I ran the grease gun a little bit and got what I hope to be all of the grease out of it. If there's a little bit of grease, I'm not that worried. I'm not using this for painting or anything. I put the 3 circles of flip-flop on top of the plug down in the grease gun itself, and I'm thinking that that'll at least be okay to bring it up to pressure. I still expect some water to leak out of the top, maybe the bottom. But hopefully that gives me the amount of pressure I need to run the hydrostatic test. The tank itself, let me bring you over to the tank. So here's the current tank setup. I've got a plug in here, which is a 1/2 inch NPT, sealed up with Teflon tape, of course. And then I've got the valve or the port that goes up to the pressure relief valve or pressure switch right here. Gone ahead and put the Teflon tape on there, and I don't know if you can see. Let me see if I can zoom in here. There's water all the way up to the top. So that means that I've gotten all of the water out of the tank. If I tip it forward, I don't get any air bubbles that come out of here. So basically this tank is air free. I gave it a little bit of time, just filling up the tank itself. I put a funnel into the 1/2 inch NPT port and used the 5-gallon bucket here and a funnel to fill it all the way up. Got it all the way full, and then used the little line with the siphon method to get the thing fully purged of air. So I think we're ready to go. I know, it's exciting. I'm excited too. Not really. It's just a safety check that I feel I need to do. And I'm going to pause the video for a second while I get set up to put the final fittings on, prime the fittings, and get ready for the actual hydrostatic pressure check. Alright YouTube, so here we are with the hydrostatic pressure check valve that I made. I took the pressure gauge off because I want to prime the valve, meaning fill it full of water, before I actually start pumping water into it. I want to make sure there's as little air in the system as possible. So my plan is to attach this here and then fill the valve itself full of water on these quarter turn check valves here. You know, this means that water or gas can flow through the valve. This means it's closed, right? So I'm going to keep it open. I'm going to attach it on here, and then I'm going to put the pressure gauge on top after I prime the whole system. So let me go ahead and get this attached on. So I'm going to kind of finger tighten it, and then I'm going to grab a wrench. One thing, especially with these brass fittings, you want to make sure that actually use the proper size wrench. So that's the 9/16, that's not right. All right, 1/2 inch is the right one. Now you don't need to go overboard with tightening these things, especially because they're all brass components. All right, that's perfect. That's better actually I had hoped for. So the lowest point on the port here, where the grease fitting is that I'll eventually be hooking up into, is now lower than the highest point of the system itself. So I'm going to go ahead and open it, and then I'm going to prime the system here, and we'll see, you know, how I can get all the air bubbles out. So one thing I'm going to do as I prime the system, what we're looking for is water, right? So I don't want to introduce any other water. I'm just going to go ahead and wrap a little towel around the stem here, so that as I overflow, I have a towel that will soak up any water that might come out as I prime it. Got my little tiny funnel and my jug of water. I'm going to go ahead and prime it. Didn't take much. Now, just going to wipe off the water because I don't want to get confused as I do the hydrostatic test by water that's residual just from priming the tank here. Alright, I think I got a pretty good priming going on here. Check valves open. I'm going to use the towel here just to take off the amount of water right at the top because I want a good seal with the gauge I'm about to put in. All right, so the gauge is 1/8 inch NPT male into 1/8 inch NPT female and 1/4 inch NPT male. Now, whenever you're dealing with a gauge, Make sure you don't over tighten it with your hand because you can damage the gauge itself. So just get the thread started and then always make sure you come in underneath and use the actual hex nut to tighten everything up. We can already see I'm adding pressure because the grease fitting that I have on here is starting to leak just a little bit, and that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and wipe all the residual water off, wipe the grease fitting off. That means I got a good basis for the hydrostatic pressure test that we're about to do. It means there's as little air in the system as possible. Just the little bit of pressure that I added, getting the fitting in there, already is causing some pressure to build within the system. All right, I'm gonna get all the water off of this because we want to make sure if there's a drop that comes out of this thing that we know that it's coming out of the pressure test, not from me getting set up for the pressure test. All right, at this point I'm going to go ahead and turn the valve closed. Remember, perpendicular to the valve itself means the valve is closed. And I'm going to grab my grease gun and I'm going to prime that and get it ready. So I'm going to pause the video for a second while I get that ready. All right, so here we are with the modified grease gun. I just used this stake to push my, flip-flop pressure fittings down into the gun. Everything's been cleaned out of grease, to a reasonable degree. I mean, there's still a little bit of residual in there, but that's okay. I'm not using this for painting, so I'm not too worried about a little tiny bit of grease getting in there. If you are, maybe go buy a new grease gun, and use the brand new grease gun. Some of them, they say you can reverse the plunger to use to fill the thing up. That might work enough for the testing, but I don't know. I have some reservation about that. So what I'm going to do is fill the grease tube itself with water. And much like the tank, I'm going to get it as full as possible here without spilling, hopefully. Probably going to fail at that. Alright, so there we go. Now I'm going to fit the top on. Counter rotate it until I feel the click. There's the click. Oh wait, no, that wasn't the click. There we go, okay. Alright, and now I'm threaded on and I'm getting it on as tight as possible. You can already see a little bit of water coming out here. Again, water builds pressure very quickly. I'm going to loosen up the Zerk fitting here. Now in my testing earlier, I didn't really see the volume of water coming out that I was hoping to, but I'm hoping that the little bit of water that we do see coming out, and I also had a Zerk fitting attached to it earlier, will pressurize the tank. Okay, so it's starting to come out there. It's not going to come out at the same rate as grease because it's less viscous. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now and move back over to the tank. I'm going to pause the video for a second and hook this up to the Zerk fitting that I have hooked up to my hydrostatic pressure fitting, and see if we can get the pressure in the tank to rise. Alright, so here we are. I'm going to hook onto the Zerk fitting. I'm going to tighten up the locking mechanism. One thing I think I forgot to do earlier over at the bench is actually release the spring. Okay, spring is released, and I'm going to start pumping. If this doesn't work, I'm actually going to use some grease that I have. And like I said, I'm not using this thing for painting, so if a little bit of grease gets in there, I'm not going to be too concerned about it. I'm going to use my knee to help push forward. Alright, so a little bit of water came out of the fitting. That's a good sign. That means I'm building pressure. Alright, this is kind of boring, so I'm going to pause the video while I keep pushing and see if I can get pressure built up. Alright, YouTube, so as with most things, you know, things don't go exactly as planned. What I found is that using a combination of hitting the spring valve, or the spring on the grease gun, putting downward pressure on the spring, and pumping like crazy with the quarter turn valve open, I'm actually starting to build up pressure now. So I'm at about 25 psi right now. See if we can get that to register. So I'm going to continue pumping, and I'm probably going to have to take a break and fill with water here soon. But I'll check back in once I actually got it pumped up. Alright, so I think I got my system worked out. I'll show it here in a second. I can't tell you how happy I am I put this valve in. Right now I am at about 70 psi. I gotta tell you, working this thing, it's a workout. I filled it once. I worked through some kinks in how I was doing it. it takes a lot of pumps. I think now that I actually have some pressure going, I think it'll go a little easier to take me up to 200. But it's kind of a pain in the ass, I'm not gonna lie. Make sure that you can see all the water on this thing. As much as I sealed this up, it's still leaking, and that's fine. Just have something to keep pressure on, keep pushing down on it as you pump. Make sure occasionally you're hitting the release valve down here, and just keep pumping, and you'll see the pressure go up. And when you're ready to take a break, just flip the valve to the closed position and take a break like I'm doing right now. And then get everything set back up and go back at it. We'll see how things go. I'm still working on it. About a third of the way there. I want to go a little bit over 200, so we'll see how that goes. All right, so here's the method I'm using to do this. I lied a little bit earlier. I'm at about 65 psi. So I've still got a little bit of water left in this gun. Loosen the Zerk fitting, fit it on, tighten it back up, get it as tight as it'll go. And then with this stool down here, first release the spring, and then I'm pushing down on this thing as hard as I can, and I'm just pumping. And every now and then I'm coming back down and I'm checking, make sure I'm still getting pressure. It helps if the valve is open. God damn it. All right, now I am seeing the pressure rise. All right, I had a little mistake there because I had the valve closed. But ever since I changed the valve over, I gained about 5 psi. I'm going to take a break, close the valve. I'm going to top this thing back off with water so I get a little bit more pressure, and then I'll come back to it. All right, YouTube, so after my second fill, and keeping with the technique that I worked out, I'm up at 130 to 35 psi. I added a pair of gloves to the mix just because I was starting to kind of get some wear on my hands and I didn't want to get a blister. But I think this is going to work out. I'm going to keep pushing and see if I can get it up to 200. If I hit some kind of a plateau, I might switch over to grease. Like I said before, I'm not really using this thing for painting, so getting a little bit of grease in there and then blowing it out and then letting my air filter catch the rest, I'm not too concerned about that. The more important thing is getting it up to pressure. So I'm going to go ahead and refill the gun and give it another crank, and I'll check back in here in a minute. All right, YouTube. I definitely hit a plateau. My tank is now sitting at 110 psi. The gun was not capable of feeding water in at those psi's. Maybe maybe a lever action gun would have been a better choice on this. I don't know. I've got the pump action gun from Harbor Freight. So against my better wishes, I've loaded up a grease tube, and I'm going to take it the last 90, 100 pounds that I need to take it to with grease. Like I said before, I'm not using this tank for painting or anything, and the fact that I'm going to add, I don't know, half a tube of grease into it and then blow it all out and rinse it a few times. Like I said, my air filter will catch the rest. So I'm not too worried about it. If that's a big issue for you, then try working out something with a grease gun or with a proper hydraulic pump that will get you up to where you need to be. I will say that the quarter turn valve is working out great. When I do need to hit a stopping point, just flipping the valve closed to be able to take the fitting off and do whatever I need to do with the pump. It's holding pressure just fine. It's up near the operating pressure right now. Operating pressure on this thing is 130. It really only goes up to about 125 before the pressure valve, or before the pressure switch cuts it off. But I'm going to hook this up, see how this goes, and we'll check back with you in a minute. Thanks. All right, YouTube, we've got success. I would say I'm at about 205 PSI on the tank right now. No real visible leaks or anything. I've got a little bit of the tube left here. I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can crank it up a little bit more, at least as much as the tube will give me, and see what happens. I'll go ahead and record me doing these last few PSI. I'm gonna go ahead and release that, open the valve, and start pumping. Okay, so I really should be taking this up to about 225. All right, I'm going to guess that's about 220 right there. Let me grab the camera and get in on the pressure gauge so you can see. Okay, so you can see I'm about as far away from the 200 as the 180 is from the 200. So let me get myself reconfigured here. Pull back. All right, so it effectively took 2 full cartridges of water, probably half of which hit the floor, and then most of a cartridge of grease. This is 14 ounces or whatever this is of grease in a 25-gallon tank. So, it's probably not going to stick to the sides much, and I'm going to rinse this thing and blow it out a few times anyway when I'm done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the tank a little bit cautiously over to a dry part of the garage because I made a big wet mess over here. I'm going to, well, remove the fitting first. And then I'm going to kind of sit here, maybe have a beer, see if I see any water come out. I'm going to dry all of the residual water from my failed water test here off the tank just so that I can see any fresh drops or anything that spring out of the tank. And I'll check back in with you after about 2 hours have passed. So, you know, here local time, 9:30 or so. We'll come back at about 11:30 tonight and see if we see anything building up. And then the fun part, we'll try and position the tank in such a way that I can blow out all the pressure. I'm probably not going to get to flushing the tank with all the grease and everything tonight, but we'll see how things go. So initially, pretty happy with this. 1.5 times PSI would be 225. I think I'm at about 220 right now. Operating pressure being 130. If I don't spring any leaks in 2 hours, I feel really good about this tank. For $60 and for a little bit of time and effort on my part for research, grease gun aside, which, you know, I kind of needed anyway. All the fittings, $25, maybe $30. Recycling the old pressure gauge from the tank as it came. I'm pretty happy. All right, YouTube. So here we are back. We're about hour and 45 minutes into the hydrostatic pressure test. So far, so good. I put a little piece of tape on here, and I'll bring you in for a closer view on the pressure gauge, just to make sure that it's holding pressure. It doesn't seem to have budged an inch or a millimeter, whatever. No visible leaks underneath. I'm in a new part of the garage. You can kind of see over here, I still have some wet mess from the earlier part of the video hanging out. Stool I use still has some water on it, but there's no water coming out of the tank. Everything seems to be holding up good. And the most important part is it's holding pressure. Even at, 220, which is almost 1.5 times the maximum allowable working pressure of the tank. I guess one thing I forgot to mention in all my previous parts of the video is, you know, any kind of reputable tank manufacturer, there will be a plate welded onto the side of the tank, and on this one it's on the back side of the tank here. When I come back to do the final part of the video, I'll show, you know, what that looks like. That will have, regardless of what the tank says on the housing or whatever, as far as the PSI that it's rated for, the real tank working pressure will be stamped onto the metal plate that's on the side of the tank. It'll be called, I think it's MAWP, maximum allowable working pressure, and it might be a little bit different than what you see on the housing of the motor. This one, the motor, you know, the housing and everything says 130, but the tank itself is rated for 150. So at 220, I'm 220-ish, I guess. I'm a little bit less than the 1.5 times the maximum allowable working pressure of the tank itself. But I'm quite a bit above what the actual working pressure of this tank will actually be based on what the pressure switch cuts off at. So we'll check back in, you know, another 15-20 minutes. Want to make sure I get up to the mechanical engineer safety standards. Once we come back out here, see no leaks or anything, we'll very carefully take the Zerk fitting off with the valve closed. And then I'll position this tank so that I can blow off the extra pressure out into the driveway here. There's snow on the ground here in Virginia. This is why I'm doing all this in the garage today. I would normally advise you do this outside. That should do it for the pressure test on this tank. So, you know, take a look, if you're just seeing this video, take a look back. I have a part 1 of this where I go over how to actually buy a compressor off Craigslist and some of the things you should check out and some of the safety checks you should do to make sure that the tank is good to go, that you're being safe with it and all that. This is probably more than most people would go through with the tank, but I kind of figured that I'm interested in how things work. I like kind of figuring things out. For the, you know, let's just call it $30 it cost me on top of the $60 for the tank, about $25 I put in on refitting the fittings on the tank. And then, you know, so I'm up at about $115, I guess, all told, plus some time. It's a good little learning experience for me, and I hope that you all kind of got a little bit of a learning experience out of it too if you're watching this. So, you know, there are good deals to be had out there. You can do it responsibly and safely. I've got young kids running around the house, so I want to make sure that I'm not introducing a pressure bomb into the house. It's really my main motivating factor for doing this in the first place. So if you want to grab, you know, an air compressor off Craigslist, get a good deal. Put in the 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, $25. $25 is what this costs. $30 because of the plug. Calling them $5 a piece. $30, a little bit of time watching this YouTube video, you can make sure that your tank is good to go. If the tank is newer, if the tank is, you know, doesn't show signs of the mud and everything that I talked about in my last video, then, you know, you're probably okay just skipping all of this. Due to the age of the tank and due to some of the things that I saw, I felt the need to go ahead and do this pressure test. So, thanks YouTube. We'll check back in, we'll blow out the pressure, and make sure everything's good to go here in 15-20 minutes. Thanks. Bye. Alright YouTube, so we are at the final stage of the hydrostatic pressure test. Just want to show the pressure gauge here. I've marked it with a piece of electrical tape so that I could tell if the needle moves lower than the pressure that I had it set to. You can see that it hasn't budged, right? So when I take this off, there's the needle. I'm going to go ahead and pull back and reposition the tank and then blow off the pressure out into the driveway. So let me get set up to do that. Go over here, this might be a better view. Okay. So this is a pressurized tank, so I'm going to be very careful moving it, and it's full of water, so it's very heavy. Check the camera angle. All right, so what I'm going to do is remove the Zerk fitting, and I'm going to make sure that the pressure valve that I put in there is closed, and that I use a wrench on both the Zerk fitting and put back pressure on the fitting that it's going into to make sure that I don't cause any pressure leaks. That must be a half. It's 9/16. That must be 5/8. Yeah, okay. So 5/8 on that. I'm going to keep pressure on forward while I grab the 1/2-inch wrench to take the Zerk. So I'm keeping pressure on the fitting that the Zerk fitting's going into. Oh, that must be 7/16. Okay. Helps if you have the right wrenches. There we go. Okay. So I'm taking the Zerk fitting off right now. It's 18 degrees here in Virginia, so put a jacket on. We got the garage door open now. Alright, so the Zerk fitting is off. There's the, come on camera, work with me. There's the Zerk fitting. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the pressure valve and blow out the pressure that's been built up into the tank. So let me position this a little bit better. All right, here we go. Fun times. And that's it. And that's why you do a hydrostatic pressure test. That was all that came out from 220, and now I'm down at 0. So what I'm going to do now is just wheel this. Now that there's no pressure in it, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the driveway, open up the bottom fitting, and drain all of the water that I use for the hydrostatic pressure test out of it. Hopefully get a bunch of the grease that I might have put into it out as well. I'm going to keep the top valve open. Alright, so that's going to take a little while, but hopefully you learned as much as I did while doing all of this. You know, that there are safe ways to check the tanks that you get and make sure that they're safe to have in your house. And I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks. Bye.